Hello everyone. There are many CPU specifications for S7-1200 PLC and their wiring methods are similar. It is necessary to distinguish the power input, power output, signal input, and output wiring terminals to ensure that the signal type and voltage level are correct. Now, let's take CPU 1215C as an example. We will explain the wiring. CPU 1215C is divided into three types: AC-DC/RLY, DC/DC/RLY, and DC/DC/DC, mainly considering how to wire the power supply, input signal, and output signal. Comparison of three types of CPU 1215C. CPU 1215C has three types: AC-DC/RLY, DC/DC/RLY, and DC/DC/DC. The first group of letters AC-DC represents the power signal with AC connected to AC and DC connected to DC. It is necessary to pay attention to the polarity of the power supply. The second group of letters DC-DC are input signals, all of which are DC input signals, and the input signals need to be connected to a DC power supply in series. The third group of letters RLY-DC and P6 represents the output signal, and RLY represents the relay output, which can be connected to AC and DC loads. DC is a transistor output that can only be connected to DC loads and can generate high-speed pulse signals to control stepper and servo driver. CPU 1215C AC-DC/RLY wiring. Power input. The L1, N, and P terminals are connected to an AC power supply of 120-240 VAC. The internal power supply is a switch-regulated power supply and the input AC voltage range is large. It is strictly prohibited to exceed the voltage of 240 V. Power output. The L plus and M terminals output 24 V DC, externally only supplying power to the input signal, and the output current and power are relatively small. Input signal 1M is the input common terminal, and all input terminal DI points are connected to one end of the corresponding input components such as buttons, travel switches, sensors, etc. The other end needs to be connected in parallel and then connected to a DC power supply of DC 24V in series. The other end of the power supply is connected to the 1M terminal, and the polarity of the connected power source can be changed. The output signal is relay output with 1L and 2L as common terminals. All output terminals DQ are connected to one end of the corresponding load such as contactors, solenoid valves, signal lights, etc. The other end of the load is uniformly connected to one end of the AC or DC power supply, and the other end of the power supply is connected to the 1L and 2L common terminals. S7-1215C AC-DC/RLY type CPU wiring. Use S7-1215C AC-DC/RLY type CPU, AC power supply, DC power supply, 14 switches, 2 analog loads, 2 analog signal sources, 1 set of 1 AC-DC power supply and 5 coil loads, and another set of 1 AC-DC power supply and 5 coil loads. Make S7-1215C AC-DC/RLY type PLC wiring connections. Power inputs, L1 and N, connect to 120 to 240 V AC voltage, ground terminal ground. Input signal, connect I0.0, I0.1, I0.2, I0.3, I0.4, I0.5, I0.6, I0.7, I1.0, I1.1, I1.2, I1.3, I1.4, I1.5, respectively, to one side of the corresponding switch, and the other side of the switch in parallel to connect to the positive pole of the DC power supply, and the negative pole of the DC power supply to the 1M. The polarity of the DC power supply can be reversed. The polarity of DC power supply can be reversed. Output signals, connect Q0.0, Q0.1, Q0.2, Q0.3, Q0.4, respectively, to one side of the corresponding coil load, connect the other side of the load in parallel to one side of the AC-DC power supply, and connect the other side of the AC-DC power supply to 1L. Q0.5, Q0.6, Q0.7, Q1.0, Q1.1 are connected to the corresponding coil load side. The other side of the load is connected in parallel to the AC-DC power supply side, and the other side of the AC-DC power supply is connected to 2L. Analog wiring, output 2M is the common terminal, output 0 to 20 mA DC current signal. Input 3M is the common terminal, input DC voltage signal from 0 to 10 V. CPU 1215C DC/DC/RLY wiring. Compared to the AC DC/RLY type, the input power supply is different and all other connection terminals are the same. Power input DC 24 VDC at L plus and M terminals grounded at P terminal, and the polarity of the power supply cannot be reversed, otherwise the power module will be burned out. CPU 1215C DC/DC/DC wiring. Compared to the DC/DC/RLY type, the output terminals are different and the other connection terminals are the same. The output signal is transistor output with 4L plus and 4M terminals connected to DC 24V. The power polarity cannot be reversed, otherwise the load module will be damaged. The DQ point is connected to the load and the load is uniformly connected to the negative electrode. The DQ point outputs a high-level signal that is valid. Analog quantity wiring. AI dual analog input and AQ dual analog output. 3M is the input common terminal, and the high potential terminals of the two analog input signals can be connected to AI0 and AI1. The low potential of the input signal is uniformly connected to the 3M terminal and the input signal is 0-10 VDC. Output 2M is the output common terminal. AQ0 and AQ1 can be connected to two analog loads of 0 to 20 mA output, and the load is uniformly connected to the 2M terminal. That's all, thank you.